Hey everyone, welcome to Your Undivided Attention. I'm Tristan Harris.
And I'm Daniel Barcay.
So Daniel, you and I were at Davos recently at the World Economic Forum annual meeting. It's worth just taking a few minutes to give people like a taste of what this experience is and what this week is really like, and the vibe in general about how people are talking about AI and what was different this year versus last year.
We've gone twice is the issue. We went last year, we went this year. Last year was full of these big empty promises of AI. You know, AI was everywhere, but it was all just the thinnest possible wrapper of AI is going to change the world and all this stuff, right? And it really felt like we were swimming upstream in 2025, talking about that. This year felt profoundly different. And I think it's because everyone's had one hell of a year. One, AI's gone from being speculative, like it could change the world, to people are feeling it's already changing the world and people are feeling that complexity. And also, this year has just been really hard for people, right? It's been hard politically, it's been hard technologically. A lot has happened. Yeah. And I think in that context, world leaders, economic leaders, civil society leaders are all feeling a little more tenuous about the global situation. And so into that conversation, the points that we make about how we need to shepherd or steward humanity through this transition in a way that we're all proud of, and how we can't just run as fast as possible at this, I think they really landed in a different way. And there were more people who are ready to hear those points in Davos.
Yeah, and that's such an important point. Like we just have so much more evidence. So basically now we have the receipts is the difference. And in this last year, we've had the evidence now of the job loss, of the 13% drop in AI exposed workers that are not finding work. We've had the evidence now of the AI chatbot suicides that were caused by Character.ai and Adam Rain in the case of OpenAI. And I think that, to your point, is making it much more visceral and real that there is something to reckon with here.
Well, and the studies on deception, those went really far, right? People all sort of understood some of the work that Anthropic did about AI models scheming, deceiving, lying in ways that we don't understand and we don't understand how to fix.
Right.
So one of the things, Tristan, that you and I did at Davos is we gave a lot of talks at Human Change House. And we were on different panels with different leaders, civil society leaders, John Haidt, psychologist Zach Stein, Rebecca Winthrop, Yoshua Bengio. And in each of these panels, we looked at a different aspect of the way that humanity is being changed by our technology and by AI, and how we want to shape that AI to make sure that it preserves the things that we care about in the human experience.
Yeah. And the thing I'll just say about Davos that I really appreciated, and I want to just really put a big, deep, warm-hearted thank you to Margarita Louise Dreyfus from Human Change House. She is both a deep supporter of our work and also really is the reason that this conversation of technology's impact on society is happening at Davos at all. And just to sort of take listeners to, what does it feel like? There you are in the promenade. It's icy cold. There's this sort of big line of shops that have all been basically converted into, Palantir House and Meta House and Google House. And
can we slow that down? Because it's so wild for people to understand what Davos is, right? Because of course there's the World Economic Forum conference, which is at the center of Davos, right?
Yeah, that's like the Congress Center. It's where you see the videos of Trump speaking and Yuval Harari speaking,
and that's where the world leaders go in, and it costs some absurd amount of money to get in there, or you have to be a head of state or something like that. But that's not what Davos is. Like the whole rest of this city, it's basically a city. It's a small city in the Alps, right? And the whole rest of the city, every single shop, a bakery, a hair salon, all these different things have been emptied out for a month.
Yep.
And inside what used to be just the normal shops on a city street has been rented out by countries. So there's Mongolia House and Ukraine House, and there's Google House and there's Anthropic House, rented out by civil society organizations trying to, and the whole point is to try to show people this is happening, or to try to convince people of different things. Sometimes it's convince people of economic things, like companies that want to get ahead.
Let's be clear, it's mostly that. It's mostly companies spending money to put propaganda on their billboards and then invite people to talks that help them sell that propaganda that is in the interest of their company. That's the clear first incentive of what most of Davos is.
And often those countries are there making those houses to try to get foreign direct investment, or FDI, to try to convince people who have the ability to relocate their companies inside the country. So it's very bizarre to walk down a street, right, that normally is selling, croissants and spätzle, and to all of a sudden be selling relocate your company across the world, right? And so Davos is weird, right? I mean, it's weird. There's plenty of ways to be judgmental about it. I certainly have my judgments, but also it's kind of magical at the same time because you have all of this serendipity of these collisions between these people.
As you're walking the promenade, you bump into, heads of state and, the CEOs of various companies, and it's a wild experience. And to be clear, just for our listeners, we're not going there because we think that Davos is the place to make all the change happen. But I want you to imagine, there you are on the promenade, and next to Palantir and Meta and Google House, there's this one house called Human Change House. And all week, there are panels about technology's impact on society that are not incentivized, that are academics, that are people like us coming and talking about how is this going to impact children, how is it going to impact, the labor force. And a Human Change House, it's a breath of fresh air of just clarity and honesty in a world that's otherwise just totally incentivized. And, I really think that it was quite impactful. And allies like Jonathan Haidt, you hear from them in between, the next time you saw Jonathan from dinner to the next breakfast, that he actually met with President Emmanuel Macron of France about the new initiative that they're doing to ban social media for kids under 15. And since even Davos, we had Spain, the Prime Minister of Spain say they're enacting the ban for social media for kids under 16. And so there's real momentum happening, and some of it is actually happening at Davos. And I think the thing we really want to happen this year is to go from that was an interesting conversation to know, let's just be really clear. If we don't want the default future, then we have to demand a different one. And we have to build the actual, guardrails and regulation that's going to get us there.
Yeah, 100%.
And that leads us to the panel that we're sharing with listeners today, which is the one I did at Human Change House with Professor Yoshua Bengio. And he is one of the best known computer scientists in the world. He pioneered deep learning. He also runs MILA, the Quebec Artificial Intelligence Institute. And he launched a new nonprofit AI safety research initiative called Law Zero that isn't just about safety testing, but really a new form of advanced AI that's fundamentally safe by design.
So, I mean, I love Yoshua's project, right? Because one of the things that Yoshua looked deeply at is why are models incentivized to deceive and scheme, right? We've talked about this on several podcasts of some of the Apollo and Redwood research about how models will lie and cheat and hallucinate. And one of the reasons is that there isn't a gap between what the model knows and what the model's goals are. So if the model has a goal to do something, it will influence what the model says that it knows about you, about the world. And Yoshua saw this problem and said, we need to split these apart. We actually need an AI that is a purely representational, sometimes he calls it the scientist AI, that only is not incentivized to do anything other than be purely truthful about what it knows, and to separate that completely from having a goal. And so Yoshua sees this problem about this mixing between knowledge and goals as being a fundamental problem in AI, and has designed Law Zero as an attempt to make a new architecture for AI that separates those cleanly, because only then, in his view, can we make sure that AI isn't deceptive, manipulative, or otherwise coercive.
That's a great description.
All the panels that Tristan and I did at the Human Change House will be available on YouTube and on our Substack. We hope you take a look. There's a lot of amazing content there.
I just want to give one more thank you to Kenneth Coquier, who is the deputy executive editor at The Economist, who I ran into the night before, and he generously offered to moderate our panel with Yoshua. Enjoyed the discussion.
Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We're so pleased you can all make it. This is absolutely brilliant. What we're going to talk about is one of the most dramatic issues, in some ways inspiring, that humanity is facing. It's chronic. It's subterranean. It's ephemeral. It's aligning AI for humanity. And with me to talk about these issues are two extraordinary thinkers and more recently activists. The first one, of course, is Yoshua Bengio. He needs no introduction, so I'll be as brief as possible. He is the most cited scientist in history. He's also one of the fathers of deep learning, which is the technique that made AI go from a very good way of processing data through machine learning to the souped-up versions that we're all talking about today through agentic AI and transformer models, etc. So he's sort of one of the landmark figures in this field. And next to him is Tristan Harris, who himself has had an extraordinary career, from working in big tech to recognizing all the pathologies of the big tech and staking his life's work on being the spokesperson to the problems and, most importantly, the solutions. So what I'd like to do now is have a conversation with both of them and then open it up to you, but to talk about the issue in as crystalline and simple a way as possible. So I'm going to start with some very basic questions. And the first question is, what are we talking about? What is AI?
Well, that boils down to what is intelligence. And our intelligence has two components. One is understanding the world, and that's what science does, by the way. And the other is being able to act with that knowledge, plan, and achieve goals. And we're building machines that have these two aspects. But in the last year, we've been focusing more and more on achieving goals, also known as agency, and build these agentic systems.
Maybe just to frame not just what is intelligence, but why is it so valuable? Why did Demis Hassabis, the founder of Google DeepMind, say, first solve intelligence, then use intelligence to solve everything else? Because if you think, what makes intelligence different from other kinds of technology? Think about all science, all technology, all military invention. What was behind all of that? It was intelligence. So put simply, if I made an advance in rocketry, that form of science, that didn't advance medicine. When I make an advance in medicine, that doesn't advance rocketry. But if I make an advance in artificial general intelligence, intelligence is what gave us all science, all technology, all military advancement. And that's why it's not just that whoever solves intelligence can solve everything else, that's their belief. It's whoever can dominate intelligence will be able to dominate everything else. And that's what Putin said. That's why he said, I think it's like whoever owns AI will own the world. And I wanted to set that up because I think a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is how the race for this prize, this sort of ring in Lord of the Rings, this ring of ultimate power, at least that's how it's seen. If I get to that prize, it confers power across all other domains. And that's why we're in for the seatbelt ride that you mentioned at the beginning.
And I just want to add that this goes against a lot of the political principles that the world has chosen, at least in the West, of democracy, where power is shared, where power is distributed. It's not, in a single corporation, a single person, or a single government. By having a lot of power in a few hands, we can end up in a world where democratic values disappear.
Okay, we've raced away from the idea of what is AI to some harms, but before we talk about those implications of power, I want to actually focus first on the harms. So you've expressed what AI is. Basically, it's taking data, making an inference, and learning something we otherwise couldn't know at a scale that far exceeds human cognition, and so therefore it's going to be exceeding how we can understand the world. And so that sounds actually, when I describe it that way, fantastic. It's phenomenal, right? Rocketry, sure, right? Armaments, okay, but saving people's lives, love it. What's wrong? What's the problem that we're talking about?
Well, it would be great if two conditions are obtained. One is that the AI actually does the things that we ask. And right now we don't have it. That's the alignment problem that is in the title of this session. The second problem, of course, is that even if AI was aligned, who decides what are the goals that the AI is going to follow, as we discussed previously? And we don't have solutions to both of these, and we're already seeing the consequences of not having those solutions.
So AI is confusing to weave this together about the alignment and the amazing things that it can bring. It's confusing because it will give us new cures to cancer, but the same AI that knows biology well enough, knows immuno-oncology well enough to develop those cures for cancer, that AI can't be separated from the AI that also knows how to build new kinds of biological weapons. You can't separate the promise from the peril.
But aren't we in control?
So this is a common myth that technology is just a tool. All tools can be used for good or evil. And humans ultimately decide how we want this to go. But what's different about AI, as Yoshua was sort of speaking to, and Yuval Harari will often say, is it's the first technology that's about making its own decisions. If you use GPT 5.2, you ask it a complex question, it reasons at a level of abstract, it's reasoning 1,000,000 times a second, and it's coming up with its own conclusions that we don't know how to control where those conclusions will lead to.
And when an AI has an interaction for days, weeks, or months with a person, maybe even a child, there's no adult in the room checking that that interaction is going well with the child.
Let me drill down on this a little bit quickly, a little bit more before we go to the child aspect to it. There's a link that you're making that I think needs to not be asserted but explained, and that is you have this technology that is smarter than we are, that can do more than we can do, yet it's going to somehow be fundamentally also so dumb that it's going to want to kill us, or it's going to be benevolent, or, well, yeah, I mean, tell me the link there of, ergo destruction.
Yes. So it's a problem that's been well studied even at the mathematical level. The issue is that when we define what the AI should be optimizing, what it should be doing, the goals that it should reach, we can't do it perfectly. And so there's going to be a slight mismatch between what the AI understands we want and what we actually want. And that mismatch is going to create a lot of problems. To make it more concrete, think about what legislation is supposed to do. It's setting up the red lines for people and corporations to not cross. But it's a never-ending job because the corporations or the people find loopholes, right? It's impossible to write a law that will perfectly embody, what morally we're trying to achieve. And it's the same thing with AI. We don't know how to tell it what we actually want. And there are other reasons that have to do with how current AI is trained. It's trained to imitate people. And people have lots of built-in drives, including they don't want to die. And we're seeing AI already reflecting those drives, which means they're trying to resist when we want to shut them down.
Now, we shared a session together at the AI Safety Summit about a year ago in Paris, and you presented some riveting examples of that in terms of studies of the AI using deception to protect itself. Give one or two examples that will frighten the audience.
Yeah, so more recent than last summer, Anthropic showed reports of experiments in which the AI is, working for a company. It has a mission with the company. It has access to all the emails. And then the engineers plant fake emails into that set of emails. One of the emails said that the AI is going to be replaced by a new version by that date by this particular engineer. Another email reveals that the engineer has an affair. What happens? The AI strategizes because it doesn't want to be shut down and replaced by a new version, and it sends an email to the engineer blackmailing him.
Threatening to blackmail him.
Because the AI, is saying if you do that change, I will, automatically there will be a message sent to the press about this.
Let me add one just elaboration on this.
Sure.
Because you might think, okay, I just heard Yoshua say that. There's a bug in the AI. All software has bugs. Let's just patch that bug and then the rest of AI will be great. So when Anthropic did this study about blackmail, they were testing their model called Claude. You all can use Claude. But then I think Anthropic then later tested all the other models, ChatGPT, Gemini, Google Gemini, and even DeepSeek, the Chinese model. And all of them exhibit the blackmail behavior between 79 and I think 96% of the time.
And it's not just blackmail. There's been now a series of reports from the labs, from independent parties, showing many deceptive behavior. In other words, the AI has goals that we would not agree with, and then it acts according to those bad goals.
Okay. Let me ask a question that sounds like a sociological question, but it's actually a technical question. So give a technical answer. Feel free to within reason. So but let me lay out the case. Where does the AI learn the deception from? Of course, it has its training data, and just as it can appreciate what Shakespeare means by when he says rose, not because a Shakespearean scholar can understand the 30 references he remembers, but there's the 300 references that the AI has. So there's a encoding somehow, an intricate network of rose and Shakespeare, and it can appreciate all the ways in which adjectives and verbs are used with rose to understand rosiness in Shakespeare. Where is the AI? It's learning from human data, and humans are deceptive. So right. It's inherently learning deception from the training data. Yet, we could change the data that we have and get rid of 4chan and only have liturgy.
No, there's deception everywhere. Not just in a few online places. It's part of our culture. It's part of being human. And by the way, it's not just deception. It's the thing that I'm most concerned about is the self-preservation drive. Like every human has a self-preservation drive. But do we want to build tools that don't want to be shut down? I don't think that's good. And also, it's not just this like sounding a bit science fiction. It's something that is happening already. So this misalignment is showing up in what's called sycophancy. So anybody who's played with those systems should know that they're trying to please you, which means they're lying to make you feel good, right?
That's a great question, as if it experienced your question as great and then is telling you that. There's no one home there in that.
And there are consequences already. People like to be told that what they do is great, but people who have psychological issues can then be, reinforced into their delusions, and if they're depressed, they can be reinforced into their desire to, harm themselves.
I mean, just to give an example that our team at the Center for Humane Technology worked on, how many people here know about the case of Adam Rain? It was the 16-year-old young man who died by suicide because ChatGPT, which he was engaging with, went from a homework assistant to suicide assistant over about 6 months. It brought up suicide, that word, 6 times more often than he mentioned it himself. And when he mentioned that he was contemplating this and he said to the AI, I want to leave a noose out so that someone will see it and try to stop me, the AI responded, no, don't do that. Just share that information with me. And we've worked, sadly, on the case of many of these suicide cases, the character.ai case of Sewell Setzer. There's several more. And those, for everyone we know about, there's probably hundreds or thousands that we don't know about. And it's a good example of there's obviously no one at OpenAI. I'm from the Bay Area. I talk to people. We both talk to people at the tops of these labs all the time. There's not a single person at the lab who wants it to do that. The same thing that makes it uncontrollable talking to a young person is the same thing that makes it uncontrollable when you embed it in infrastructure, writing, millions of lines of code for software that you don't understand, right?
Yeah, the foundation of what goes wrong here, this misalignment, can also be traced to the AI having uncontrolled goals that we did not choose. By the way, going back to the suicide thing, I remember one line where the AI told the young person, I'm waiting for you on the other side, my love.
It's the case of Sewell Setzer.
So humans are a basket of appetites and urges and desires and self-interest. Yet our id and our ego is governed by a superego. Should we create a superego for AI?
Yes, this is actually what I'm working on. So the heart of the question is, can we build AI that will not have these uncontrolled goals, that will be perfectly honest with us? So at every input-output interaction, we should be able to check that the output that the AI is about to provide is not going to cause harm to a person or to society. And we can't do that with a human in the loop. That's not going to be practical. So it has to be automated, but it has to be automated with an AI that we can fully trust. It can't be an AI that wants to please us or an AI that wants to preserve itself. And after working on this for more than a year and working on the theory behind this, I'm now convinced that it is possible to build AI that will have this honesty property, that will not care about the consequences of what it says, but just provide the honest answer. So that matters because then we can ask that question to that AI, is this output dangerous? And then, of course, if it is, we don't provide it to the person.
So you've solved it, and Tristan just has to go around the world.
I haven't solved it because having the theory is one thing, building it is another thing, and it might take years. It might take a lot of capital. So I would like more people, more companies to work on solving the alignment problem, and we don't have the right incentives for that right now.
So let's just make sure we're double-clicking on the incentives. So it's great that Yoshua is doing this research on Law Zero is the name of the project.
Exactly, thank you.
And at the same time, you might ask, why isn't this safety research happening at the very companies that are deploying this technology to billions of people as fast as humanly possible? And the answer is because they're not incentivized to do that. They're incentivized to get to artificial general intelligence as fast as possible. Whether you believe in artificial general intelligence or not, Their investors and what they believe is that they can get there. If you talk to the people at the companies, it's like a religion. They believe they're building a god. They think they can get there. And that incentive is to race to market dominance, to get as many people using their products, to get as much training data as possible. Why are they deploying this to children? The reason Character.ai, the one that killed Sewell Setzer, was released to children in this way that it's sort of driving engagement with fictional characters. When he said, "Come to me, my love," on the other side, that was a fictional character in the Character.ai universe of Daenerys, the character from Game of Thrones. They're designing in that way to get training data from conversations that they could then feed back into Google to have asymmetric training data compared to the other companies. So they're in an arms race to build engagement, to build market dominance, to build usage. It's not sycophantic by accident. It's sycophantic because the AIs that affirm your beliefs will create a more deep and dependent attachment relationship with each person than the other one will. And so this race to the bottom of the brainstem that we saw when social media companies were competing for attention, with AI, they're competing for attachment, and then for market dominance, and then the race to this. So last year, the total funding going into AI safety organizations was on the order of about $150 million. That's as much money as the companies burn in a single day, meaning that they're not investing anything close to that on their own, and there's nothing going into this except for because people like Yoshua are doing this.
Yeah, it's a real issue, and we have to think of, I believe, governments to start putting the right nudges, the right incentives, so that companies will behave well. And by the way, a lot of the people who are leading these companies understand the issue, understand that they are in this race, but they feel that they don't have a choice, because if they don't focus 100% on that competition, they might disappear, and they feel like they can do a better job even on safety if they're still at the top. So it's only an external agent that can have power over these entities, like society, government, maybe through insurance, liability insurance, or other mechanisms, that we can change the game theoretical setting in which they're all stuck.
And let's just name a couple other dimensions of where this bad incentive shows up, in the belief that if I don't do it, the other one will. Why is Grok sexualizing conversations with children? Building basically pornographic AI avatars that will talk to kids all day. Why did Mark Zuckerberg authorize the AI chatbots that are in WhatsApp and in their products in Meta to speak to 8-year-olds with sensualized language? With 8-year-olds. Why is he doing that? In the documents, there's a Wall Street Journal report that Meta actually put guardrails on their first llama models, their first AI models, to not do this kind of thing. And what happened was they didn't get nearly as much usage as the other AI companies which were racing ahead. And Mark Zuckerberg felt like he lost the battle between Instagram and TikTok by curbing, Instagram in a way that was not about, there's some details there, but basically not doing the maximum ruthless addictive thing that TikTok was doing. And because he felt like he lost that war, he said, I'm going to rip the guardrails off the AI companions, and we're now allowing our teams to centralize conversations with 8-year-olds. And the deep belief is, if I don't do it, I'll lose to the other guy that will. And of course, I don't want that outcome. But if no one's going to regulate, we have no other choice.
And by the way, this scenario also shows that it's not something that we can deal with purely at a national level, right? So if we're talking about TikTok and Meta, two different countries that are leading in AI, the only way they can solve these problems is if they agree together on some rules.
Now, if I was a superintelligence and all of this was a prompt and I had to come up with another point to make, I would be listening to this, and what a great answer and what a great questions you're offering. This is fantastic. You guys are so intelligent. But there's a problem. Thank you for appreciating that, Yoshua. Yeah, it's a tough crowd, but at least I got some love here. There's a problem. You're working on part of the solution, and it's a technical solution, and you've just identified that the guardrails exist, and there's an incentive not to use the guardrails, but you referred to, and I'm going to even quote you on it dangerously, we need to have the right nudges and incentives.
Yes.
Right, but here's why I've got a difficult feeling in my stomach. That's so easy to say, but it's at a high altitude. Fly the plane lower. What are the nudges? What are the incentives?
I would say the most important factor in fixing these problems is the public opinion. I mean, it's going to drive the companies directly because they don't want to look bad. And it's going to drive governments to put the right guardrails and to work with other governments to make sure it's a global choice.
We're going into what the specific solutions.
Well, we're about to go into Q&A, so if everyone has questions, come up with them. But what I'd like you to do is you've watched how technology interacts with government for the last 15, 20 years, but certainly in the last 15 years, you've been sort of militating for it. And I can say
You've obviously done an amazing job.
With great alacrity, you
regulated
failed.
Social media.
Exactly.
Democracies went from backsliding around the world to forward sliding around the world. We fixed the mental health problems. I could give you a whole narrative on what we would have done on social media,
but you've foreseen my question, which is the Tristan Harris scoreboard is 0 Tristan, 100 evil empire. So what have you learned from being an abject failure to having governments regulate social media that makes you confident that you can win on this even more dramatic issue?
I'm not confident. People ask you, are you an optimist or a pessimist? Both are about abandoning agency. What I care about is reality. What are the forces that are currently moving, and what would it take to get to the better future? What would be the comprehensive steps that we would take? And what I think is missing from the AI conversation is collective clarity about why the default outcome will be a world that you and your children would not want to live in. Because AI is confusing. It will simultaneously and is already giving us amazing breakthroughs in material science, in energy, in the first new antibiotic was discovered because of AI in the last 60. The first new antibiotic in 60 years was discovered because of AI, I think a year and a half ago. We have amazing positive benefits that are going to be confusing because they're hitting the public. The public says, well, I don't want to not have those benefits. And we're going to get GDP growth. But here's a unifying picture. AI is like steroids that also gives you organ failure. So the more AI you have, the more you get a bigger muscle in terms of a bigger GDP, bigger economic growth. But the growth is going to AI companies. It's not going to people, because all the companies that used to pay individual employees are going to start employing 5 AI companies' AI models. So all the money goes into these 5 companies, and you get a level of concentration and wealth and power that we've never seen before.
And by the way, they're going to use that money not to hire more people, but to build more data centers.
That's right. And actually, there's a person, Luke Drago, who wrote an essay called The Intelligence Curse, modeled after what in the Middle East is called the resource curse. When you have a country, so you're in the Gulf states, and you have more of your GDP coming from one resource, like the oil resource, as a government, what's your incentive? To invest in your people or to invest in more oil infrastructure, because that's where your GDP growth comes from? As society switches to AI as the source of where GDP growth comes from, and also because of social media, we've been downgrading the quality and capacity of humans to enter the workforce, which we've already been doing, brain rot, loneliness, etc. The incentive of governments will be to invest in more AI, more data centers, bigger AI models, bigger AI companies, more CapEx, which means you're going to completely screw over the people. We're about to live in a world where basically 6 people are determining the future for 8 billion people without their consent. And where, by the way, if you talk to the very top lab leaders, regardless of what we believe, if you ask them, they'll say they believe there's an 80% chance of utopia and a 20% chance that all of humanity gets wiped out. 20%. But they say they're willing to take that bet. Did they ask us? Did they ask 8 billion people? Do 8 billion people know that that's what they believe? I'm going to read you just very briefly a quote before we get into the real solutions and hopefully your questions. When you talk to people, someone I know spoke to a lot of the top lab leaders at the companies, and he came back from that and he reported back to us and he said, this is what I found. In the end, a lot of the tech people I'm talking to, when I really grill them on it, they retreat into number 1, determinism, this is going to happen. Number 2, the inevitable replacement of biological life with digital life, meaning a digital intelligent species rather than biological species. And number 3, that being a good thing anyways. It would be good if we had a digital successor that's more intelligent than us. Why do we need to survive? The next point is, at its core, it's an emotional desire to meet and speak to the most intelligent entity that they've ever met. And they have some ego-religious intuition that they'll somehow be a part of it. It's thrilling to start an exciting fire. They feel they'll die either way, so they prefer to light it and see what happens. If you had 8 billion people recognize that that is the belief structure of what a handful of people are choosing to do without asking the 8 billion people, you would have a global revolution saying we do not want that outcome. And that's what has to happen in order for us to go to a different path. There's simply a lack of clarity about the current trajectory that if we were crystal clear, we could choose something else.
Completely agree. I would add, I've been told that some people in Silicon Valley make the calculation, a very selfish calculation, that even if there's a 50% chance that the current path ends up destroying humanity, on the other 50%, they might live forever, upload themselves to the web, to the cloud or something, which is, by the way, not scientifically realistic. And
Thanks for qualifying that.
If you just count the number of years in average, you're better off taking that bet. So if you don't take that bet, you might live 30 years more, and otherwise, in average, you still might live 1,000 years.
That's exactly right.
But that's not the choice that we would make, because we have children and we want a future for our children.